Morning. It is Tuesday morning. You're with 5 Live Breakfast. The European Court of Human Rights will rule shortly on whether 6 terrorist suspects can be extradited from the UK to America. We're expecting that decision in the next hour. They include the radical and notorious cleric Abu Hamza and Babar Ahmad, who's accused of raising money for terrorist groups, and 2 men allegedly involved in the bombings of US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998.
The court is considering whether the long sentences which the men face if convicted and the prison conditions in which they could be held would breach their human rights. The former US prosecutor David Raskin says the men would be treated fairly.
Our extradition partners around the world can rest assured that the defendants who are extradited will receive fair and just proceedings in criminal cases in the United States.
We can talk to Amna Ahmad, who is Babar Ahmad's sister. Good morning.
Good morning.
And also we're joined by the Conservative MP Dominic Raab, member of the Joint Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights. Hello to you.
Good morning.
Amna, I'll be with you in just a second. Dominic Raab, they're very different cases, all these, if we look at them. I mean,
they are.
Abu Hamza, convicted of 11 of the 15 charges. He was jailed for 7 years, guilty of 6 charges of soliciting to murder, 3 charges of stirring up racial hatred. We read sections of his speeches, ghastly, racist, thoroughly contemptuous individual. The case of Babar Ahmad is less clear, isn't it, Dominic Raab?
Yeah, it is. There are a whole range of cases along the spectrum, and I'm not going to sit here and rule judicially on the individual cases. There's 2 points I'd like to make. I think if this Strasbourg decision is upheld, which basically says that we can't extradite to the US because if they're convicted fairly and squarely, they'll have life without imprisonment in tough prison conditions. I think if that's upheld, it would lead to a rather perverse situation. On the one hand, we've got our blunt British extradition laws that don't protect the innocent citizens in this country from being extradited in the first place. You think in particular of cases like Richard O'Dwyer. And on the other hand, you've got European human rights law that protects a serious terrorist player like Abu Hamza on the basis, as I said, even if he's fairly convicted, that he'd face life imprisonment and tough prison conditions. I think British justice should be firm but fair. And so, to be honest with you, if that is the ruling today, I think that would be the worst of all worlds.
What will the implications be?
Well, I don't know. We'll have to breathe in deeply and try and look at the situation in the round. To my mind, there are 3 aspects. We do need reform of our extradition laws, so there are greater protections for the innocent. We've seen the Prime Minister and President Obama talk about that recently and acknowledge that, and I think that raises the expectation that on the US side there'll be some change. We also need to look long and hard at the European arrest warrant. We also at the same time need some Strasbourg reform, which the Prime Minister is leading, to reassert UK democratic control over the increasing judicial legislation from Strasbourg. And I think, at least as it relates to Strasbourg, there comes a point...
But the European Court of Human Rights rules against ministers. David Cameron's plans to reform the European Court of Human Rights will be up and will be turned to dust, won't they?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think you've got the general reform agenda, which will carry on, but that's not going to happen overnight. And then you've got the immediate situation. And what I was coming on to say is I think it is high time that the UK draws a line in the sand and reasserts democratic control. We've seen prisoner voting, we've seen the Abu Qatada case, and now another fetter on our ability to remove a serious terrorist player. And I think we have to actually look long and hard about what we do about that.
Is Babar Ahmad a serious terrorist player?
Well, again, I don't want to opine on individual cases. But
you have on Abu Hamza.
Yes, and precisely because he's been convicted on 11 counts, as you've already said.
This man's been in prison without seeing any evidence.
Hold on. It's one thing to talk about someone that's been convicted of 11 counts, and another thing to respect that someone is innocent until proven guilty. I do think in the Babar Ahmad case it is absolutely wrong for anyone to be held for 7 years in pre-charge detention. I do think that there is a legitimate question about why, when all the conduct alleged in that case, the Babar Ahmad case, took place in the UK, why he's not being prosecuted here, which is why one of the reform principles I support is a forum test, which means that when you've got these cross-border cases, in open court, a judge decides where is the best place to have the prosecution.
Yeah, OK, stay there if you would. Amna Ahmad, would you like him to be prosecuted in this country?
Absolutely. I mean, the evidence was all collected from the United Kingdom. We believe there's been a serious abuse of process. In November 2011, the Crown Prosecution Service admitted that it was never actually shown all of the evidence in relation to Babar's case. So what had happened is that the British police handed over the evidence to the United States without handing it to the Crown Prosecution Service, which is what they were legally bound to do. So we're calling for a public inquiry that what's happened, why was it not handed over to the Crown Prosecution Service? He should have been put on trial here.
And the US alleges he was responsible for a global fundraising campaign for extremists in Afghanistan and Chechnya through a website operated from, I think, Tooting, South London somewhere, but technically based in the US. Clearly he had a passionate concern for his co-religionists elsewhere in the world, yeah?
I mean, these are serious allegations that have been put against my brother.
Is it a serious allegation to accuse somebody of having a passionate concern for their co-religionists?
Well, like I said, he's never actually been shown any evidence or questioned about his concerns, about his what his beliefs are, what he's alleged to have been done. The evidence was collected from the United Kingdom. He's never been shown that evidence. He's never been questioned on that evidence. There's been an abusive process. The evidence was just shipped across to the United States. It's a question of sovereignty. I mean, why are we outsourcing our cases that we can quite clearly prosecute in the United Kingdom? Why are they being outsourced to the United States? It's the same as Gary McKinnon, Richard O'Dwyer, Chris Tappin. The principle is the same, regardless of the nature of the allegations.
What are his beliefs about what was happening in Chechnya and Afghanistan? Because it's a massive debate, this, about what somebody is able to believe, how far they go with those beliefs, and what measure of support they give to people that they believe are being oppressed. So where is your brother on all that?
I mean, one of the things that my brother has always maintained is that he's against violence. He's not an extremist. He said this publicly last week in the Newsnight interview. He is against violence. He's not an extremist. But again, this doesn't even come into play here. It brings me back to my original point. Regardless of beliefs or anything, if a British citizen who's paid his taxes, worked and lived in the United Kingdom is being accused of crimes that have been allegedly committed, I mean, the evidence has all come from the United Kingdom, why should he have to go to the United States? We're not against extradition as a principle for people who commit a crime in a country and then flee that country, but Babar is not a fugitive. He didn't flee the United States.
So, yeah, Dominic Raab, I mean, why does this case have anything to concern the United States at all?
Well, the argument is that the web server that Babar Ahmed was acting from was based in Connecticut. So it's not something like, for example, the Abu Hamza case, where he's accused of setting up a terrorist camp in Oregon. He's accused of taking hostages in the Yemen, some of which were American. And I think they are serious charges against Babar Ahmed. But I think in this kind of cross-border case, I think it's perfectly legitimate to say, why have the UK authorities not taken the decision to prosecute when all the criminal conduct alleged took place in this country?
Yeah, and the web server, does one choose one's own web server?
Well, exactly. But the way these things are decided now is prosecutors and authorities get together, it's behind closed doors, and there's something of a haggle. What I'm saying is that in this kind of case, we need changes to UK law so that in open court, a judge decides based on criteria set by Parliament where the right place to try this kind of case is. The problem with what Strasbourg is doing today is it's not focusing on that issue at all. All it's saying is even if they're fairly and squarely convicted, you can't send them to the US because the prison conditions are too tough. So in a way, it's the wrong court looking at the wrong issue.
Do you think there is a danger that their human rights would be abused were they sent over there?
I think it's ridiculous to impugn the entire US penal system when at the same time we merrily extradite to appalling justice systems and prison conditions. I think of the Andrew Sameu case in Greece. I'm thinking of Michael Turner, who's currently facing trial in Hungary. He was held in prison in remand in a facility formerly run by the KGB. It's total double standards.
So Amna, what are your concerns? What are you worried would happen to your brother were he to be extradited to the US?
Well, firstly, I mean, it brings us back to the original point. In principle, we think that it would be a great miscarriage of justice if he is extradited. But if he is shipped across to the United States, we're worried about pre-trial detention conditions. I mean, Chris Tappin, he's not even accused of terror-related crimes, but he's held in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day with the lights on. I mean, he's a retired elderly gentleman, and he's being held in those kind of conditions.
So pre-trial detention conditions. Anything else to concern you?
And also the fact that he could be, the US will not be under any pressure to just put him on trial. He could be in that condition before trial for literally years.
Are these legitimate concerns, Dominic Raab?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've said this all along. I think Strasbourg is focused on the wrong thing, and I've called, and the House of Commons has voted unanimously for reform of our British laws decided by British courts. So we've got some basic safeguards. So the kind of issue that's just been raised is settled promptly in UK courts before people are catapulted over to the US, or for that matter, slung over to rotten Greek prison cells or corrupt justice systems in Central and Eastern Europe.
Well, thank you. And Amna Ahmad, you must be feeling incredibly nervous right now.
Yes, we are nervous, but we also have a lot of questions that the British government needs to answer, which is why we're calling for this public inquiry into Babar's case.
What's your top question?
Our top question is that why did the British police not hand over the evidence collected in Operation Quarry in December 2003 to the Crown Prosecution Service? Why was it bypassed and handed over to the United States?
OK, that decision is due quite shortly. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amna Ahmad, Babar Ahmad's sister, and the Conservative MP Dominic Raab. It's 8:17.